Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the June 17th, 2025 special meeting of the City Council of the City of Palos Verdes Estates for the purpose of discussing the one agenda item, long-range fiscal planning workshop. We have a nice little critical mass of people here, so why don't we stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. May we please have a roll call?
Councilmember McGowan.
Here.
Councilmember Lazaro.
Here.
Councilmember Quinn.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Kemps.
Here.
And Mayor Lozey.
Here.
We have a quorum.
And so let's confirm that one of our council members, Councilmember Lazaro, is participating remotely, and that was all properly noticed. Everybody nodding? Okay, yes. Good. Like, somebody nod.
He's asking me if there's a live stream. Is it up? Oh, it is.
You good?
I don't know. Must be.
Okay. All right. So communications from the public. I see a couple people in the audience. Anyone have any comments at this point on this agenda item? Looking at the two of you. Mr. Williams, please.
I don't have anything very insightful to say, but looking at the 5-year forecast and having looked at some of the past budgets, I've often wondered how much money is spent on maintenance. I believe it's probably is or should be a significant item, and I'd suggest you consider adding that to your template when you go forward.
Great. Thanks for the observation. Okay. So, sorry, we had one more person. Tom, did you want to say anything at this point or not yet? He's looking, nope, okay.
Not now, not ever.
Picking on the two people in the audience. Okay, so let's get into our workshop. And long-range fiscal planning workshop. This is long-range fiscal planning workshop number 2. Who's going to kick us off? You want to say a few words?
That'd be great.
A couple initial
comments and
okay.
Then turn it over. Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of City Council. Yeah, this is our second long-range fiscal workshop. We had one, I believe it was on June 3rd, so about 2 weeks ago, or exactly 2 weeks ago. At that meeting, members of the ad hoc committee, council members McGowan and Lazaro, presented some draft spreadsheets and some working models, and the council and sort of led a council discussion on what's the next 10 years going to look like. Looking for some, I believe they were looking for some direction to place into the model. Tonight's plan is twofold, with Councilmember Lazaro remote. Councilmember McGowan, I believe, will be leading off the discussion. A PowerPoint has been put together, to continue to sort of tell the story and sort of where the city stands and what the future looks like, followed by distribution of updated spreadsheets to the council, and those are also available online. It's an attachment on Granicus, and a further discussion. With that, I will turn it over to Councilmember McGowan to kick us off.
Okay, thank you, Carrie.
Councilmember McGowan, do we have hard copy of your presentation?
It's on the screen.
Do we have hard copy of the presentation?
Apparently the answer is no.
Okay.
I'm sure one can be printed later, but this has been changing within the last hour, so it's hot off the press. What I'd like to do today is we're going to break this into 2 different components. The first one, we're going to go through a PowerPoint presentation which has been designed. This is a draft presentation, I should add. I don't know if it is on the screen, I believe, but it's covered up. But this is intended that we might consider something like this type of a level of presentation to a next town hall meeting where we're addressing the public at a very high level and trying to help them understand the complete story. Later after we go through this presentation, I will walk you through the more detailed model that supports the conversation that we're going to have in this PowerPoint presentation, but also recognizing that we most likely are going to want to do another type of presentation, which is somewhere between the one we're going to discuss right now and the lower level detail, but one that gets more into the detail weeds. One of the feedbacks we're getting from a number of residents is, tell me the story in a simplistic, straightforward manner. If I need further detail, I want to be able to know where I can go get it, whether it be, some of this is going to be on the website, and we may have more types of presentations with smaller groups or neighborhood groups and so forth. So with that, I'm going to begin to move forward. Before we do so, I want to specifically acknowledge Tom Lorenzo and Eliza for their support in putting this presentation together. They've been insurmountable in not only helping with the graphic, physical pieces of it, but also coaching us on how to say different words and send the messages that are going to be most impactful to our constituents. And to that, I can't thank them both enough. Okay. It worked earlier, George.
I can see it on my screen.
There you go.
Oh, okay. Okay. PVE is at a critical juncture. We are, get the point, things right. It has reached the end of the road. And this is a presentation that's going to talk about the critical situation that our community is in as we speak. We lack adequate revenue to maintain existing services. The public safety, our parcel tax Measure E, is expiring. We have a deteriorating infrastructure without reserves, adequate reserves. And last but not least, our pension liabilities are growing. So what does this mean for the residents? A significant revenue increase is required immediately. That's the punchline. Our city revenues are primarily driven by residential property taxes, which gives us very few options. This presentation will provide a background leading up to where we are today. It's going to indicate how it will impact you, and you meaning the residents. Meeting our service needs, what is required. Our definition of anticipated needs as we go forward into the next 10 years. And if funding is not secured, what services may be impacted. So let us get into the background. Very simply, our revenues are primarily driven by property taxes, which is no secret to anyone. 8% of our revenue comes from concessions. The miscellaneous revenue is 17%, which is made up of fines and other types of fees for services and so forth. But 75% of PVE's general fund revenues are generated from residential property taxes. We are fiscally constrained. With or without a Measure E replacement, expenses are outpacing our revenues. Let's go back and talk a little bit about our famous Prop 13 in California. This dollar we've seen before, but I want to bring it to your attention one more time. This tries to break apart the real estate tax dollar and how it gets allocated to the various jurisdictions that you're paying taxes for. And I will call your attention to the far left-hand column, or side, where Palos Verde Estates gets 11.3 cents out of every tax dollar that our residents are paying. The rest of it is going to our school districts, it's going to Los Angeles County, it's going to educational libraries and other activities throughout the county. One of the things I want to highlight is that over 40 years ago, when Prop 13 was initiated, Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors did an allocation formula as to how these dollars would be shared. And one of the component parts of their allocation methodology was a allocation to the Los Angeles County Fire Department. Back in those days, Palos Verde Estates had our own fire department. As you know, in the late 80s, I believe it was 86, we as a city elected to go to the LA County under a contract basis. But the allocation formula that was established after Prop 13 was initiated was and has never been changed, nor is it feasible that it will change in the future. So what does this mean to our residents? Our residents, as I indicated, in Palos Verde Estates receive 11 cents out of the dollar into our coffers, which we have to use to cover our operating expenses, including the contract with LA County Fire. If you look at an equivalency for our neighboring communities on the peninsula, because they don't have to pay their share to the LA County Fire, that's part of an allocation that directly goes to the fire department, their equivalency in comparison to PVE is double and then some, as it's depicted on the side. So what is Measure E? We found out a lot of residents don't understand what Measure E is. Maybe they're new to the community, maybe they just haven't paid any attention. But Measure E was a voter-approved parcel tax that funds a portion of the police services in PVE. It generates approximately $5.1 million annually. And why is it disappearing? Well, because it sunsets in fiscal year 26-27. In other words, when these parcel taxes were implemented, they had a definitive life cycle. And the way that Measure E was set up, it was set to expire in 26-27. And I bring that up because we're going to have to talk about that again as the duration if we think about a replacement parcel tax is the term that we want to consider. One of the things that's important to remember, every time we do an election for a parcel tax measure, it costs the community significant dollars and time and an investment of time and people. I'm trying to bring this home to your own personal real estate tax bill. This is not a representative bill in our community, and I want to come back and see if we can obtain one. But I want to use this as an illustration. If you look at the very top, the general tax levy, all agencies, in this particular example, is $18,000. The city of Palos Verde Estates receives 11.3% of that $18,000. That's all they receive. If we look further down on the tax bill, you're going to find a line item called PVE Law Enforcement. This is the parcel tax that I've referred to as Measure E. In this example, it's $1,200. The difference between this line and the one I just showed you previously is 100 cents on the dollar goes to the Palos Verde Estates. So how will it impact you? Let me just go back to how is Measure E calculated. The current measure, if we used a median square foot home in the community of 2,700 square feet, the parcel tax is currently defined as $342 per lot plus 20 cents per square foot. Now again, the city gets 100% of the revenues generated. Putting this in a mathematical formula, it's about $890 per year or $74 a month. And that's what the residents are currently paying on an average basis in a Palos Verde Estates. One request I'm going to have for the council or anybody that can help us, if we can identify and find a tax statement for a recent year of approximately $2,700 per square foot, I would like to replace the previous illustration that we used and bring it back to something very comparable to this. And time has run out, so we utilize the one that you just saw.
The one you had is pretty good, actually.
I'm sorry?
I think the one you had actually wasn't bad because you have the median at 2,700, but the average is 3,500, and that other example you had almost hits the average.
Well, the problem, the tax bill that I previously indicated is a much larger home. And the law enforcement piece, this equates to $1,200, where on an average home, it's $890. And I was attempting to get something more comparable so that we don't have any confusion. But moving right along. The amount and how the replacement tax will be calculated is currently undetermined. And this is one of the things we'll come back to. It's one of the variables that the council is going to have to challenge itself with. So meeting our service needs. This discussion is going to be broken into two different sections. I'm going to call an operational section, which includes our police and fire and all the operational needs of our community, roadways, public service, or public works, and so forth. Then we're going to separately talk about the infrastructure funding needs of our community. So moving into the operational side, the way in which we began our analysis was to start with our existing service levels, recognizing that some of these service levels are inadequate. And what I mean by that is we have cut back in order to balance the budget as best we can, and we have reduced a lot of services or things that we should be providing to the residents. And a great example are communications. And I was part of this. We cut our communications budget back, and we weren't properly communicating. We have since hired Tom and his firm. We've also cut back a lot on our weed mitigation. We've cut back on our landscaping or tree trimming. And all of these have pent up demands and needs within our community that we are now having to address and face. So that's what I mean by, in some respects, I don't think our service levels are up to the standard that they should be. Recognizing that additional cuts and deferrals may be required before a replacement parcel tax can be considered. What I mean by this, there's a lag time between today and when we can get something on the ballot, get it approved, and get it on the tax statement, and then collect the cash. The lead time is 18 plus months. Sometimes it's up to 2 years. So it's something we've got to be very cognizant of. And as we look forward in our long-range thinking, the day of reckoning is much closer than we may think. In determining our service costs, what does it truly cost to provide the required services our community expects and deserves? This gets back to some of the things that I was just discussing. We hear people wanting more fire mitigation clearance. We want more communications. We want more trees trimmed. We want more of this, that, and the next thing. These are all considerations that we have to, as a council, I think, address. We find that our expenditures are really broken into two categories: people and outside services. Our people, behind every service in our community, there are individual human beings that make that happen. And if we don't have the proper number of people and the quality and the expertise required, we're not able to deliver the kinds of services many of our residents expect. We contract with a lot on the outside, which is a prudent for a community the size of ours. And we need to better understand what these outside services are. We refer to them also later on as contracts. I don't want to misconfuse people, but we're really talking about outside contractual services that support our staff. So our baseline analysis, we reviewed the staffing levels in the service contracts, and we built in assumptions for inflation, which we'll go through later. Now, some of the additional considerations that we wanted to get into, and I think these are necessary that we consider them individually and collectively. We have targeted public safety investments, which include staffing additions to help maintain 9/11 response times and crime prevention efforts. I'm going to pause for just a second and indicate that any incremental service needs that I'm going to discuss in the next couple of minutes have been, in our financial modeling, have been deferred until after an assumed passage of a parcel tax. Nothing in between. Right now, we may need to cut more services between now and the parcel tax, but any of these incremental needs are envisioned to be post-success parcel tax. We have considered expanded weed abatement and open space maintenance. What we're focused on here is reducing fire risk by managing the brush and the weeds proactively. Enhanced tree maintenance. Maintaining public safety and neighborhood aesthetics is part of it, but it's also safety in the maintenance of our urban forest, which we have ignored and we have utilized to reduce service levels in order to balance the budget. We also have included some project-oriented needs, which address infrastructure as well as safety improvements as they arise. We know that there are certain things that we need to address, and we've got to build them into our forward thinking. Our long-term financial stability and planning has to include incremental reduction in pension obligations and the impact that that has on our fiscal viability. And last but not least is, as we go forward and think, we need to provide some contingency funding because the unexpected is going to happen. I can't tell you when, where, or what, but we all know that we will have unforeseen expenses, and if we've got to be prepared to cover those. So when you put all these pieces back together, this is a bar chart that represents, it doesn't include any of the incremental items I just talked about, but this is how our police and fire, which are the two darker bars at the bottom of the stack, and then we've got our public works, which is the gold color, and we've got the community planning blue, and then the lighter blue is a combination of the city manager, council, and attorney, city attorney, and so forth. But my point being that you can graphically see that our expenses are growing faster than our revenues, and this does not include those incremental costs we just discussed. If we were to include those, that bar in 2035 would be upwards of $44 million, not 38. So what I went back to do is I looked at our revenues. We looked at our revenues assuming Measure E is not replaced. Yes, we are going to see a marginal increase in revenue as a result of inflationary factors. But it is not, if you plot that against our expenses, we find that the expenses are growing faster and there's a wider gap that happens each year. And again, that red line does not, I emphasize, does not include any of those incremental items we previously discussed. The revenue projection, I've already said that, and with or without Measure E, expenditures are outpacing expenses. That's no new news to the council, but I think this is a message our residents probably do not understand in totality. So meeting these service needs, we also want to flip now to the infrastructure. The scope of this discussion, the analysis includes police and fire facilities. Emergency repairs are addressed, but major improvements remain on the unfunded CPI list. Future solutions may vary in scope and cost. We have got a tremendous amount of work to do with our infrastructure and planning for the future. And thank God Oscar is with us today, because his job is just beginning. We have a tremendous challenge, and I'll come back and talk about how we're trying to build some of these costs into it to accommodate that need. We all know that we have an aging infrastructure. Our infrastructure is 75 plus years old. It's not just the building that we're sitting in right now, it's also the sewers and the streets and everything underground that we don't see. And part of our concern right now is, as you all know, we're doing some sewer studies with cameras and so forth to better understand the situation we may be dealing with so we can adequately plan for the future. Our capital needs list currently exceeds $25 million just based on some of the basic infrastructure, and we know it's totally inadequate, and there's many more things that need to be added to it. But I just put that out there as a reference point. So we look at our infrastructure needs, planning for long-term investment. This is one of the things that I've just referred to with Oscar and why we are in dire need of putting some investment into planning for our future needs so that we're prepared for the future. We're going to need to do a reserve and a cost analysis study in order to identify all of the infrastructure needs, what their age is, what their condition is, what their expected remaining life is, what it may cost to replace or repair that infrastructure, as well as the inflationary factors and what year that might fall. But this is all forward thinking that if we don't start building for, we're not going to have the adequate funds available to meet our needs. And accordingly, we have included in the model an annual contribution of $4.25 million to the capital reserve fund or capital improvement fund in our analysis. So when we pull all these together, we have various components. We have our projected revenues, which we've all talked about. We have our expenditures, which are growing faster than our revenues. We have to transfer cash on an annual basis to a capital fund in order to be prepared for future needs of our community, as well as some past overdue needs as we currently sit. And we need a new clicker. Can't afford it.
Batteries, maybe?
We need to maintain our cash flows and emergency reserves. Our treasurer is sitting over here, and if we aren't able to maintain enough idle cash for him to make payroll and so forth in the first 6 months of the year, we have a serious concern. So what this is all coming out to is our parcel tax needs are at least, it should be, this slide should be reading 17.25, but the analysis we're going to talk about is going to suggest that. But the point being, These are guesstimates. This is not precision. We're working in the future. We've got to use our best judgment and education and background and experience. So, definition of these anticipated needs, there's several key factors that I think the council is going to need to consider from a policy perspective. The first one is, should the measure include a cost of living adjustment? There's been a lot of debate on this particular point. As you know, Measure E did not include a cost of living adjustment, and as the rapid inflation we've had in the last year or two has really caused a serious negative impact on the community, which we're going to have to now play catch-up ball with. And what is an appropriate way to look at the future, whether we include a COLA or not? We could do a modified COLA where maybe we set a ceiling of, say, 3%, and if inflation were to exceed 3%, we'd only increase it by the 3%. If it came in less than 3%, we'd use whatever the CPI index would indicate. These are all judgmental calls. These are debates that we need to schedule on our agenda. Bear with me. We need to revisit the allocation formula. As I indicated, currently the Measure E is allocated $342 as a base cost plus 20 cents per square foot. Given inflationary changes in the community environment, we need to do various examples and testing as what is a fair allocation formula as we think forward over the next 5 to 10 years. I don't think maintaining the same formula is necessarily the right answer. We also need to take into consideration whether we need to do something with low-income seniors, some form of an exemption or some form of program that might aid their particular situation. We have to be cautious on how we would define such a program, how we would administer such a program. It could become a very costly item for the city, which is not built into any of these projections. And a sunset clause. I talked earlier about the fact that these elections cost money and they have a finite life. Ideally, it would be nice to not have to go through this exercise again, but that probably is not reality. And I think we have to seriously look at what is the right balance for our community, and this is going to require community input. So what services may be impacted without additional funding? We'd have a heightened risk from service reductions, meaning limited resources may constrain critical services like weed abatement, tree maintenance, which are essential to managing fire risk and protecting our homes. This is a concern for our residents. They're probably their largest investment in many cases is their home. Our infrastructure pressures may grow. Without dedicated capital funding, deferred maintenance on aging infrastructure may lead to increased costs and safety concerns. We've all learned already that deferring and kicking the can down the road on these maintenance issues costs more money in the long run, and that we can't afford. Our service delivery delays could be impacted because without adequate funding, all city services would be impacted through potential staffing reductions and other cost containment methodologies. My conclusion is this is the time to get informed and to make your voice heard. The future of Palos Verde Estates depends upon community engagement. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, if I could just make a couple minutes of very brief comments.
Yep, hold on one second.
Just don't go into the numbers side of it yet because I want to go through that separately.
Well, I first wanted to congratulate the team on the presentation because it really was very good. So good job.
Thank you. Well, it's a lot to that guy over there and
I get it.
Eliza,
Yep, the whole team for sure.
but it's a collaboration.
Councilmember Lazaro, what would you like to add?
All right, well, thank you. And, first of all, I want to thank Dave for taking the heavy weight of the work tonight.
Whoops. Hold on.
We can't hear you.
We lost the
Hold
microphone.
on, Derek, hold on. Hold on 1 second. Sorry, we lost the audio on this side. Hold on.
Time to change the batteries every other meeting.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yes. Yes.
We need rechargeable batteries.
This is when we need that
Poor
music.
George. I know, it's like I was just thinking like Jeopardy song we could do. Yeah, really. Derek, say
let
a
me
couple
know when
words
I'm
and
back.
let's see if we have you.
Am I back?
You are back.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I'm going to go quickly here, but I want to make just a couple of comments highlighting one or two points and then just nuancing one or 2 points that my colleague, Mr. McGowan, has made. So one of the key facts that was pointed out here is that the anticipated or sort of calculated needs are approximately $17 plus million. Partly for the audience, and I think partly for the other council members, this doesn't necessarily mean that that is what the ask should be for a parcel tax, right? It's basically saying if we were going to fund, everything we are sort of putting in this model, that would be the number, but there's certainly room for debate as to whether that's exactly where we want to land. Getting a little bit into the detail, I think one of the most valuable things that we're going to get out of tonight's meeting is an Excel document, which is posted online for anybody in the public to download. And what that does is it really helps to sort of show how we got to the 17.5. Because I know when I've gone out in the community, I'm talking to residents, a lot of them are shocked. Even when you mention a number like 15 million, they say, wow, that's a significant increase. How do you get there? And so I think having a posted Excel document is an extremely valuable thing. And obviously, we welcome feedback on it. People can disagree with some of the assumptions built into it. I'll say I don't necessarily agree with every single calculation and assumption, but I think it's a very good model and it's a very good starting point, and it's generally in the right ballpark of where the conversation needs to go. I think that one of the other points that I do want to make, and probably the one place where I don't necessarily agree with my colleague, Mr. McGowan, is his concept of excluding police and fire facilities. We saw that there were repairs and so forth for the City Hall included in the CIP proposal from staff in recent budget meetings. And I believe that especially if we ask for a relatively large number like 15 million or 16 million or certainly 17.5 million, I believe that we will be able to find ways to fund the necessary repairs, et cetera, for City Hall, for the police and fire facilities within that money. It may mean that we may need to make a couple hard decisions on some of the other things we want to do, but I personally believe it is pessimistic to believe that would be impossible. One of the other things I want to just quickly, sorry. Am I still there?
Yep.
Okay, sorry, I got a phone call in the meantime.
Yeah. Okay.
One of the last other things I wanted to just quickly point out too, if you end up looking at this Excel document, you will actually see that the general fund really barely increases with this large additional parcel tax. And I think that's a really, really important point, because if you look at revenues, you look at expenditures, some people might look at that and without realizing how the CIP transfers work, they might think, oh, this just means the city is putting away money every year. And it really doesn't. It really kind of nets out to something pretty close to zero, especially over time, as expenses continue to grow. And so I think that, largely for residents who might be watching this and then looking at the Excel, look at that general fund over time. It really doesn't grow, with the increases in expenses that we anticipate. And then the very last comment that I'll make is I personally don't believe that we should be talking about service cuts over the next 12 to 18 months. I know that we have talked about that a bit in the budget conversations and some of the longer range planning. And I certainly share the concerns, I think, that a couple of my other colleagues have expressed about what happens to our general fund if we don't make cuts, and isn't it prudent to make cuts. But I equally, and perhaps even more so, have concerns that cuts will destabilize our staff and our service levels, potentially. And I also think the cuts, might impact really critical services like fire weed abatement that are either sort of contractually locked in, and or represent some of our highest priorities in actually keeping residents and their homes safe. So I share concerns that we are potentially looking at running out of money if we don't get a parcel tax passed soon. But I also think that we're going to have blowback if we really make any sort of significant cuts that worry me as much or more. So with all of that, I'll turn it back over to Dave.
Thank you.
All right. Could we pass out the little handout? This is what Derek was just referring to, that's been posted on the website, and we have a couple for the people in the audience if they want to follow along.
Just for clarification, it's posted on the Granicus under the agenda and as attachment. So just make sure everyone can find it. It's watching from home.
What I would like to do is I'd like you to walk you through the logic and the way that this is presented, and you can go home and play with it in any of your desires. The first page is really focused on the revenues as we projected them out to fiscal year 35. And I'll start with the property tax line, which based upon our last conversation at the council meeting here, was expressed concern about the growth rate, and we have now increased the growth rate of the parcel tax, or the property tax, to 4.25%. If you look at the box at the top of that page, it has the various assumptions that we've assumed, and rather than to play a lot of what-if games, which it's set up to do, we can test various growth rates or leave them as is. But this presentation right now reflects a 4.25% increase in the property tax line. When we get to a replacement parcel tax, and I'll talk about that in just a moment, I've assumed a 3% increase, which would be effectively a COLA, but it's at 3%. The other growth rates and the revenues are basically at 3%. If you look at the bottom portion of that page, you'll see I've broken out property tax, parcel tax, and so forth, and you'll note on the parcel tax in fiscal year 26, that's the $5.1 million of Measure E that we've previously talked about. And for illustrative purposes, this document, I've dropped in $17,250,000 as a replacement for that $5.1 million parcel tax to demonstrate how this pagination works. Our revenues then do grow under that assumption to approximately $50 million by 2035. With that, if the council has any questions on the revenue page, I'll take them one page at a time. I think this reflects our prior discussion about increasing the growth rates.
Do you want suggestions on the slides? Do you want
Pardon?
suggestions on the slides at the end, or do you want to do that after this?
Well, I can go through, let's go through the model.
Let's do this first, yeah. Keep going with the model, yeah.
Okay.
So I would just say, I don't think it's material, David, but, so the other taxes, that's the, what do you call that, Carrie, the triple flip?
Triple
But,
flip. That's a new one.
The vehicle license in lieu. VLF, yeah. So I would just have somebody eyeball that for, I would think that Grove's more like at the 4 1/4. But just eyeball it, go get some, it's not going to be material because it's not that big of a number. But I think it's more, I would think it's got a similar growth rate. So just double check it. Not material.
The point that you just made is the most appropriate one. By moving a couple of these percentages at one point or one way or another doesn't move the needle.
No, but we need accuracy.
Well, but accuracy is good.
But yes, we need as much accuracy as we can, but this is not a precise document. This is a 10-year visionary look-see as to where we're headed and where we should be concerned.
Understood.
Okay, flipping to the next page, the first part of that page, again, has the assumptions at the top, and you'll notice that we've used different growth rates for different types of expenditures. Administrative is at 3%, safety at 4%, the fire at 5 3/4, which is kind of based upon our historical trends, and then everything else is at 3%. At the bottom of that page, we've got the various departments where their current budgets reconcile back to essentially what we've previously been reviewing for fiscal 26, with a couple of exceptions. One of the exceptions, I'll go pick on our city attorney. I think we agreed the other night to put in $600,000 into the budget for the current upcoming fiscal year. I have got it in here at 700 and growing. I personally, I'm concerned that 600 is probably too low, but again, that's a judgmental call. That's the only change that was really made, and the other changes that are reflected in the 26 numbers, as you remember our discussions that George presented the other night, we haven't built in MOU costs, we haven't built in certain staffing open positions that are going to be filled partway through the year, and there are a few other things that make up a difference. But again, George and I have gone through this with Carrie, and we're materially in agreement with these numbers, as using it as a baseline.
David, could you please explain MOU for the residents?
Memorandum of Understanding for the various labor groups that we've got, the police union as well as the administrative union. We're just trying to finalize those negotiations, and they are going to require some increased costs that had not been originally anticipated in our analysis.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
How did you do, sorry. How did you do the escalation? Was it separated into controllable and uncontrollables? Is there some sort of isolation here where we would know, we could say, of this escalation, it's there, it will be, or other escalations, it's... We
haven't gone to that level of detail because very candidly, the accounting records are not reliable to do that. It would be strictly a judgment call. But what we have done, again, this is a 10-year horizon, and you've got to use a little bit of Kentucky windage. In some
What'd
respects.
you call it?
Kentucky windage. You're too young to understand that stuff.
Thank you for the compliment.
Okay, if you turn to the next page, that's the one.
Just one more thing on that one on page 2. So for me, I would want to see, because it is a major part of our budget, I'd like to see for our next meeting, maybe the math on the fire the fire, how you came to the fire escalation rate. That's just a super important number to be able to communicate to the community.
But that's all documented. I just don't have the documents with me.
No, yeah, for sure. Next time, that'd be great.
If you flip the page, this is the one that I think we need to spend a little time on. This is really a continuation of the first page. But these are the incremental assumptions that have been built in. And unfortunately, the headers don't appear at the top of that page. But if you look at incremental staffing, police department, I can't speak, of $553,000, that is falling under fiscal year 28, which the assumption is that we would, and this is a key point that we need to consider as a council. I have assumed in this model that the parcel tax would be approved and passed in June of 26. If it does not pass in June of 26 and it goes to the November ballot, these numbers may need significant adjustment. We don't know, because we may miss the window of getting it on the tax statement and we be deferred another year out, which is a major concern given our depleting reserves. Just want to keep that in mind. George and I are trying to wrestle that down a little bit further to find out there maybe, if we had to do an election in November, is there a way we could get it on the bills that would be going out in November of 26, which is work to be determined. Okay, back to the police department. There is another sheet that's behind it. It's page 4, which will give you the detail of some of these assumptions of incremental staffing and so forth. And you'll note that in working with Luke and George and Carrie, they've identified 4 different positions that they would like to recommend that be built into this budget for the police service officer, the sergeant, police officer, and a detective, as you can read. The dollars have been calculated to include their benefits as well as their base salary. And I've just carried those forward to the 553 on the previous page, just so you understand there is a methodology behind each one of these numbers. Similarly, with the administrative, there's 4 positions that have been recommended that we include in this analysis, and that totals $362,000 in fiscal year 28, and then we've just grown that as future growth rates apply. Weed abatement. Before I move off of staffing, is there any questions on staffing? Yes, sir.
I've got a question on administration. Are all these additive, or are there some offsets with the contracts that we have engaged with today? Will there be any reduction in those contracts as a result of these hires?
I'm not aware of any offsets, but I'll leave it Carrie and George.
I think they are additive, but that was a good question.
It's a really good question. You love to stump me up here, don't you?
These are all additive, but it's conceivably possible there could be some offsets. I think part of the goal, Craig, I think that was Craig talking, we wanted to make sure we had the costs represented so that we could have a discussion and say, okay, we think X position is worth $115,000, but we don't think Y position is worth 125, right? So now we've got it in front of us. You could think of it almost like a menu. We can say yes, we can say no, we can debate it, but it's there, it's out there, it's public, it's available for us to discuss as well.
And are these numbers fully loaded, so salary, benefits, and pension, lifetime pension obligation?
Yeah, it's total comp, including the benefits, but obviously when you talk about lifetime, that's something that need to be calculated. The pension liability is not encountered within it. No.
But I want to go back to your question, as I look at the positions. to Councilman Lazaro's point, it's sort of a nuanced answer. So one of the positions is Public Works Management Analyst. Yes, we would be able to offset our contracted out because a lot of that type of work is being done through HR Green right now. To put a dollar value on that right now, it's not something we could do. The Public Works Parkland Superintendent concept, I think we all agree that we would get much, if at anything, we would get more efficiencies out of our current contractors. We'd have better eyes out in the field. I think the support services office specialist, that was a position to help with some of the clerical duties associated with the city clerk's office. Offsets may be seen in sort of some of the help that we have to bring BBK in on. And then if I look over to the policing, probably the biggest one that would have an offset would be the service officer. Right now, as we've talked about, that's the dispatcher position. We're running very, very lean in that position. And one quick little tweak or sniffles by somebody working in that requires overtime for someone else to cover. So I think that just having a little bit more would lower the overtime. I don't know how it would all pencil out, but it's a long answer to what you thought was a simple question.
So from the council's perspective, are you comfortable with leaving it the way it is, or do you want to make some changes to the staffing?
I'm fine with it right now. These additional positions?
What did you say? I'm sorry, did you
I'm
ask a
fine.
question?
I'm okay with it.
No. No. I mean, well, the note I wrote to myself is that we're going to go out in the community and explain that we're going to tax people so that we can grow and build a larger organization. I think we got to think about that. That requires a lot more discussion. Adding 8 positions to an that's 12% headcount growth in a teeny little town like ours where you're about to raise people's taxes. I think that requires some discussion. I like the menu, but I think we have to think. I'm not prepared to just say, oh yeah, looks great. Sorry, no.
Yeah, and Madam Mayor, I don't think we're at a point in the conversation where we're planning to sort of bind ourselves or anyone else into this is the final view of it. But I think it's more, again, to kind of continue discussion and, hopefully maybe set an order of magnitude. I mean, we may say we like the concept of a parkland supervisor. We like the concept of, weekend code enforcement. Are we ready to put that in a budget for 2027? I mean, obviously not, but to account for it in our needs projection. And as I mentioned earlier too, we may not actually end up asking for 17.5 in a ballot measure, right? So some of this may drop off anyway, depending on the final number that we actually ask for. But it provides scoping for what's possible.
Sure.
The concern that I have is that time is of the essence. We're going to have to make some tough decisions. Maybe it's not today that we make these decisions, but in the very, very, very near future, we've got to, the 5 of us, come to an agreement as to whether we're going to include, exclude some of these items. And because we need to know how big the bread box would be in order to carry it to the residents. So if we can't make decisions
I think you're right,
today,
Dave. I think you're right. And I'll just make one other comment on the staffing point, which is, I manage many, many millions of dollars worth of vendor contracts, every single year. And I've done that for many years. And I have never had a multi-million-dollar vendor contract where I don't have somebody getting paid 6 figures or well into the 6 figures who isn't there managing that contract full-time or something approaching full-time. So to me, the thought that we have, the Bennett contract, the BATS contract, some of the other contracts of that magnitude, the HR Green contract, and we don't have people in the field actively managing those contracts is directly contrary to my professional experience running operational departments that provide customer service to end users. And so, it would just be my strong recommendation to my colleagues that we look, I mean, yes, it's $100,000, it's $120,000. I don't want to trivialize that. But in my experience, that more than pays dividends in the resulting output of the vendor and in the efficiency of the vendor. And I think that over time, it may not happen in year 1 or even 2 or 3 possibly, but over some period of time, as you readjust those contracts, I think we would absolutely have opportunities to optimize our engagements with Bennett and Batts and HR Green and whoever else is filling some of those services. And I think we would recover the money. I think we would, frankly, more than recover the money. I think the police department positions are a little bit more open for debate, but I think that what we have heard consistently from the chief and from others within the department is that they are running in the red line, that it affects their ability to recruit personnel. It affects their ability to maintain personnel long term. We have an extremely young department. I believe we only have a single female sworn officer within the department. I think that there's a high probability we're going to continue to bleed officers out of our community if we continue to put them under the pressure that they have been under for the past several years. So I think that, as a policymaking body, we need to be a little realistic about the operational components. And yes, looking at dollars is important, but being realistic about what it takes to actually run a 24/7 operation is something that I think we also have to be a little realistic about.
Yeah, I think Derek's brought up a good point that I would like to divert just 1 second and ask you to take a look at page 5, which is another way of looking at the expenses by department. And one of the things that we're working on, and it will become part of this package in the next iteration, I think. George, is that a yes? We're going to have a definitive breakdown. You see, we've broken out salaries and benefits of $10 million, and we've broken out contracts at 13.7. We're going to have a listing of each of those with more detailed information about who the vendor is, what it's for, when it expires, what the rates are, and things that we can use as more of a tool to monitor and understand how we're spending the money. One of the other reasons this chart was put together is to demonstrate very quickly to our residents, when you get to our our people and our contracts, we have a little bit of insurance and utilities that's over 95 plus 98% of our revenues or expenditures. It's really people and contracts, and with insurance and utilities making up another 5%. So it's a different cut of this package, but the vision that I have been trying to put forward is we will have a couple of other schedules that will go into this packet of materials that will include the detailed listing of contracts to reconcile back to which department. Unfortunately, what we're finding is that there's a lot of miscoding in the accounting records, which is making it very difficult to pull it together and reconcile it. But that is work in process as we speak. So with that said, I'd like to go back then. Let's just at least talk about the weed abatement. We made a council preliminary decision at the last meeting that we wanted to enhance it by $750,000, and that's exactly what we added in to the numbers. Is that still number?
Do we know what it's going to take?
For what purpose?
Yeah, we said we were going to double our weed abatement?
What was the purpose of the
Yeah, I don't remember that.
augmentation? And Kerry also talked about cost reductions through goats. So how does all this come together?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. So, for one thing, we've seen in several recent council meetings where we were discussing the scope of our current weed abatement and the fact that we're only doing, it varies, right? But in many cases, it's 20 feet of weed abatement when the recommendation is up to 200, depending on certain conditions. So we were able to get the goats to do a couple of other areas, but even with the goats that we added this year, we are still not doing all of the areas that were tagged as highest risk. So I think some of it is an anticipation of, we have several additional acres, many additional acres of high risk areas that are not being addressed or not being addressed in fulsome. So I think that's one of the goals. I think that partially it is being responsive to the survey results, where residents highlighted that weed abatement in general is one of their highest possible priorities, if not the highest priority. I think part of it reflects some of the conversations that we've had about the current way that the parklands are being managed with the use of herbicides, and that we have, I think at least a couple of us have some discomfort with that, and the possibility that addressing it differently may cost more. So I think when you add all of those components together, to say it's exactly 750, again, it's something of a placeholder value, but it seems that when you're talking about, significant additional areas that need to be addressed to fully meet the recommendations, plus all those other things, I think we're certainly talking about at least a few $100,000 of additional weed abatement cost. Now, we may recover some of that in a different way.
Hold on, Derek. Mayor Pro Tem.
So can you hear me, Derek?
Yeah.
So the sheet says weed abatement. You're talking about landscape maintenance.
Yeah.
Are we missing a topic?
No. So, I mean, look, and I understand that technically we have two different contractors for this, but I'm blending it together to some extent, because at least my own personal observation is that there is some overlap between the actual work that they do, right? I mean,
Got it.
landscape contractor, vice versa, right?
Got it. Thanks.
Yep.
All we've tried to do with this presentation is to record the numbers that we agreed upon putting in here, so that we could have this kind of a discussion. And maybe what we need to do is have a focused discussion just on these incremental additions and how comfortable the council is including or excluding them.
I'd like to ask that, and as I look at these incremental positions and the other spending, I have three numbers in my head. The one number says we get the 17.5. The second number says we get something less than that. And the third number says the parcel tax doesn't pass at all. So my answers are different depending on each one of those. Mm-hmm. And then we have to decide as a council what we're going to move forward. So I think, I would hope all of our answers would change depending on how much money comes in. So what are we voting, what are we looking to do right here?
Well, what this is designed to do is to identify the needs as we see them as a council for the foreseeable future. Now, once we've defined that, then we're going to have to make a judgment call as to, are the residents willing to do that or not? If they're going to do something less than that, what do we change to make it the monies fit the expenditures?
So I have a question, just using the tree trimming as an example So like on page 3, okay, so tree trimming, the column's empty until you get to that fiscal 28 column, but that's because it was probably in just the public works bucket before that, right? So this is actually in addition. So for additional tree trimming, you're talking about adding 700,000 to the existing tree trimming budget.
Yeah, everything on page 3 and everything on page 4 of the spreadsheet is all additive.
Okay, so here's how I would look at this, probably different.
And this is what we talked about at the last meeting.
Okay, this is how I would probably look at this different. Just look at using that one as an example because it's one thing. So our current budget is about, call it 350,000. It's 365.
360 or something.
It's 364, but call it 350. Okay, 360, whatever. So you're going to add 700. Okay, so now you're saying that we've been going along all these years, spending certainly since probably 2017, 2018, certainly. we've been spending $350,000 a year on tree trimming. And then all of a sudden, right after a tax passes, you're going to plop another $700,000 into that budget, and you're going to say, okay, the minute that passes, we're going to spend $1 million a year on tree trimming. So to me, I think that's my issue with probably this whole pay, and probably the employees too, is that when you say, okay, I'm just going to plop it all into year one and then escalate, extrapolate the expenses going from there, versus I think what would be a more prudent and more indicative of the experience of our ability in the city to ramp up and to deliver services, is that if you say, okay, we want to get to $1 million, we're at 365 and we want to get to $1 million, so if we've been assuming, you're assuming a 3% growth in expenses, but for public works, we're going to ratchet that one up a little higher. And we're going to say, okay, we want that to grow faster than the 3%. So that number is an 8%. But I think that to plop in another 700,000 and then extrapolate it forward, I mean, I don't know that we have anything that shows that we need to do that.
So
let me try to.
Hold on, Derek. Derek, hold on. Derek, hold on. Derek, hold on. Sorry. Michael, go ahead.
I have a laundry list, but I'll just hit this one.
Yeah.
I think it depends on whether we want to look at, and this sort of goes to Craig's point, do we want to look at ideal, what we would like to provide from tomorrow forward if we had the money? That's sort of the top, that's not a baseline. I hear the word baseline. But maybe the difference between baseline, that's where Victoria is, and where this is. I see it as sort of trying to project forward ideal. We get a lot of requests for additional tree trimming. Now, who should fund that and all that is a debate. But if the idea is, look, we've spoken with Carl 50 million times, and he's said multiple times, I've heard it myself, I need $1 million in budget to do this properly. Okay, well then we're going to put in the $1 million. We're not going to grow to the $1 million. We're going to put it in. I'm not advocating for or against it. I'm just saying I think we're talking about ideal versus a gradual growth up to that ideal, and that's the difference.
I think they're talking about putting a number in and saying, okay, what's the delta and what's the tax number?
No, I think using tree trimming as an example, I think if you go back in history, you will find that we have cut the tree trimming budget, diminished it over a number of years because of the fiscal constraints. We have deferred tree trimming issues and overgrowth throughout the community that residents have been complaining about. Other residents want to keep it that way. I fully understand that. But we're currently at, this last year was about $300,000 for tree trimming, and it was made very clear to me and others that that wasn't adequate. And one of the things we were going to do with the new inventory and everything is develop some kind of a strategy. All I'm trying to suggest, and I didn't put that number in here, it was the number that five of us came up with at the last meeting, but we need to look at what's the deferred portion that we have to remediate ourselves for to get to a level that we can maintain these trees in the public space the way they should be.
But we don't have that information, so to plop $1 million in there, that's a lot of money when we have no history of ever having spent $1 million on tree trimming.
Okay.
Before we cut, we spent like 500,000. Go ahead, Derek.
But in a slightly nuanced way. So first of all, I agree with Mr. Kemp's that this is sort of an ideal concept, right? That we are not necessarily advocating for 700, but we're saying in an ideal scenario, how much would we need? I actually happen to agree with Mayor Lozzi that 700, I personally think, is a rather high estimation of what we may possibly need based on the history. But I also will say the following, which is we haven't really accounted for inflation in this city properly. And so if we look at what we spent back in 2017, we really kind of need to double that to get to what we need to spend in 2027 and 2028, because we've actually had very, very high inflation for services within Southern California over that roughly 10-year time span. And again, just to remind us all, we're not talking about 2025 dollars. We're really talking about 2027, 2028 dollars. And so if you take the inflation that's already happened in California, you add even relatively modest additional inflation, services have practically doubled. And what people are getting paid, in the private sector at least, has practically doubled. And so I think we have to be careful about saying, well, 350 was adequate back in 2017, because it's really not adequate today. It's really double that number. So maybe it's not an additional 700, but maybe it is a total of 700 or 800, really just to provide similar services to what we were doing several years ago.
One more point before I lose it, and I have some comments on the slides as well. I think, and I'll say it generically, we can go back through the slides if you want. I think generically, and I'm not casting doubt or opinions. First of all, I think great job on the slides themselves. I think the slides are, because of who created them, more naturally pushed towards the capital side of the equation, and I feel like I got to fight for my side of the house. The slides don't talk about pension debt at all. They don't talk about the increased UAL at all. They don't talk about the fact that that's crowding out general money that we could have to spend or allocate to capital, whatever. Doesn't deal with it at all. So, can I have a slide?
Always mentioned at the beginning and then it didn't. It didn't continue. Yeah, so you can.
It's a bullet point.
Can I respond to that? Michael, there's a reason for that. And that it goes back to the advice we had from our outside counsel, Tom and others, that the pension issues, the survey results they tried to tone that down. And Tom, maybe you can even address it from your perspective.
But that's a policy, that's a policy issue.
We do have $1 million in there for it.
It's a prioritization.
It's not ignored.
Well, it's a prioritization, but it's also, we were trying to put the presentation together that could be rolled out to the community. Now, Michael, I know you're very strong on wanting to pay down the pensions, and I think that's viable. That's why it's in the presentation. But it wasn't downplayed at the expense of infrastructure. It was downplayed because of the advice we were given.
So I think part of the reason the Measure E was challenged and that many people said, hey, this isn't enough, it's not going to keep up, et cetera, that's been proven. And I think to go out to the community and say, hey, we want to raise I'm picking a number, $17.5 million, without saying to them, oh, and our debt's increased from 15 to 21 if you measure it with the default discount rate, and oh, now we have to pay $2 million to service our debt instead of $700,000, and oh, we need to add more positions, and by the way, does it include all the cost of the positions? Absolutely unconditionally not. Because it doesn't account for the fact that if you get, for example, in the police department, and I'm not picking on the police department, if you grab laterals you get a classic laterals, then you better figure out how much debt you've been accruing and start adding it. Mm-hmm. So this is the same argument that we're all having about inflation, about not putting money away from capital, whatever else. I just think that over time, this subject is not given enough credence, which is why I keep saying it again and again and again. And frankly, I don't give two squats what you think about the survey, because one of the answers in the survey was fiscal sustainability. And for some people, fiscal sustainability is raise $17.5 million, and for other people, it's stop building debt. So, I don't know whether the community is going to be comfortable with a scenario where you say, oh, we want to keep our debt in check, or the community says we want to pay it down to, but pay it so that the plans are 90% funded. Somehow there's got to be some agreed upon execution in which we get that debt under control and we maintain it and not look away from it, because I can see a scenario where we grow positions, we raise $18 million in revenue, and we end up on the other side of this thing sunsetting and everybody goes, oh my God, we've got $50 million in pension debt.
Well, yeah, I don't see how you.
Well, does anyone disagree with a pay down? I mean, whether it's $1 million or a little more or a little bit less. I mean, personally, I think it's a good idea. I mean,
yeah, I don't know if the number's $1 million, but
we got to model it. We got to model it, because I think the question for the community is, Are you comfortable keeping the debt level the same as where it is and maintaining it all the way through? Pulling a number out of the air, that's probably the $1 million. You're not going to pay down any debt. Or if we're going to go out and raise $17.5 million a year, in which we're able to provide more services and whatever else, do you want to pay this down like you would pay your mortgage down? And if so, what do you guys think? I think there's the problem.
Can I ask you a question?
Maybe you need to model it, Michael.
Hold on,
so we
Derek,
can-
hold on, Derek.
Money toward what I'll call the.
Derek, sorry, hold on. David, start over, sorry.
You need to model it in order for us to put a number in to figure out how the equations work out.
I owe Carrie,
I don't-
I've been gone. I owe Carrie an email to that effect, so
Well,
yes.
Yeah, I have put in the 1 million, which was based upon our last conversation, and I understand that you may have done some additional analysis and think it should be greater. I don't know what those numbers are.
Greater.
And this model is set up where we can be interactive and we can sit down together and try to figure that out.
And let me also acknowledge at the end of the day, the residents may say, you guys are all crazy, we're going to pay 10. Okay, well, that's going to come with changes, to your point a minute ago, right? So I don't have a problem with starting with ideal, but again, if we're going to go to ideal, I'm paying debt down more, way more.
Well, I think just to step back a second, but, when we go out to the community, I think there's kind of three components here. One is shoring up operations, ongoing operations. One is ticking away at the pension obligation, and one is ticking away at our capital needs, right? You got to do all three of those things to go out to people.
Yep.
Right? You have to. I don't know what the number is, but you have to. Otherwise, the number's $5 million. It's just renewing the same $5 million that does nothing to plug a hole.
That'll make
Does
it
nothing.
worse.
It does make it worse.
David, you have $1 million in here now?
Yes, right now there's $1 million built in here. And that's.
The question I've got, does paying down the pension debt work like a mortgage where you can choose to put all the additional money into a, principal, or does it not work that way? Or if we give them $1 million,
it's a little bit different. You can make choices to pay what are the most expensive amortized bases in the way that the pension funding formulas are calculated.
Right.
Okay.
So you can pay off your highest credit card first, to use that analogy.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly it. Yeah. So
Got it. Okay. All right. And one thing I'll echo Dave in just saying these were the numbers we talked about very briefly at our previous meeting. So we're not necessarily saying these are exactly the numbers we think are right, but they were, numbers that felt like they were in range to at least continue the conversation.
In the actual presentation that goes to the community, I appreciate and have no problem, I think, because I'm closing my eyes because I'm trying to remember the slides that are not in front of me. I think I have no problem with most or all of what's in those slides. I think it's well done. And Tom, to your credit, well formatted, beautifully done. It's a deal killer for me to not talk to the community about the pension that has grown and has been has amassed to the size that it's at, and that despite the fact that we've paid a couple $1 million down against it, it's still sitting at $21 million, even with a slightly increased discount rate. We have to communicate that. Now, if ultimately they don't want to fund all this, and we end up being forced to kick that can down the road and shrink, whatever the number is that's paid against it, same thing with capital, same thing, right? Then so be it. But I think it needs and deserves attention. And I think that if you're going to get a segment of our voters that are very concerned about that issue, you better address it. That's what I'm trying to say.
Michael, I'm willing to commit that I'll work, and Derek will work with Tom and Eliza, and we will add a slide or two to the package somehow to address these concerns. We will talk to you about it in the interim, but in the meantime, if you want to do a modeling.
Just to be clear, three of us are not talking about this outside of a public meeting.
If you would be so, in the next go-around, we will.
Yeah.
But if you would work the numbers that you think from a modeling perspective for the pension, what you think should be included in this, nice to have kind of
Yeah, so I owe Carrie an email requesting that GovInvest actually model this, put in the numbers from our MOU changes, and then give us, I'll ask for those couples. It can run multiple scenarios, right? So for me, one of the scenarios is maintain debt where it is. The next scenario is pay it so that they're funded at some percentage, call it 90. I don't know if there is a third scenario. Maybe those are the two. And maybe the third is, a slightly drop to discount rate. I don't know. But we can ask them to model it. We're paying them for the subscription. I'll write Carrie the email. And
the question is, how quickly can they do that? Is that something that can be done in a week, or is it?
I mean, I can go do it myself in a model in 10 minutes, but I want somebody else to validate it.
The point is, I think we need to get that information sooner rather than later.
I understand.
Because if we're going to get ready for any kind of community situation.
You can write the slide with
We can
Tom's
write the
help.
slides, but we can.
That's my main concern, is that it be addressed, and that it's grown from X to Y, and that we need to address it. That's it.
All right, let me move on with these other items that are judgmental in nature. I've added a line item here called equipment reserve. I think we talked about it last time. This is basically to replace the squad cars and other equipment and computer paraphernalia that we have in our city. We have not put any monies into that fund for a period of 2 or 3, 4 years. I also recognize that there is staff is working on a proposal that could change the way in which we acquire vehicles and so forth for the community. But the dollars, whether it be in a line item such as this or incorporated in one of the departments, is probably tit for tat. So I think we need to keep some level of recognition of utilization of assets and replacement of in the forward thinking, because currently it's not there. That's what the 125 is. And then the next item is I strongly believe that we need to have a contingency built in to our long-range thinking. I've utilized $500,000 a year because we know things happen. We've had surprises. We had multiple surprises over the last 2 or 3 years where we had to go over budget, and it's going to happen in the future, and we've got to be prepared for it. And right now, my recommendation is $500,000, and that is growing with inflation as well. Then we get to project concerns. We've identified 2 or 3 of them. One of them has to do with Malaga Cove water, and I had discussions with Carrie and others that I don't think we're going to be able to walk away from nor should we walk away from the water issue in Malaga Cove until we can come up with a remediation strategy that we are prepared to take to seek third-party funding. And that's going to cost us some upfront money. That's the reason I've got a couple $100,000 over a 2-3 year period built in for that. That may need to be skewed one year versus another. Another one that we've talked about, and it becomes an increasingly needed issue, is a new accounting and ERP system. We've talked about, if we go through that process, we've got it where we are going to need outside assistance. There will be a early on year or two of where we may need more services, but then the way these systems are now being charged for, there's a licensing fee that goes out into the future, and that's why you see the numbers of $50,000 in subsequent years. It's just to anticipate how that project or that environment would work, and that will help the efficiencies of our community and how we manage things tremendously. But it's got to be a hurdle that we've got to get over. And the other more project-oriented nature in here goes back to our capital infrastructure needs and doing whatever, whether it's a master plan, an inventory, whatever, we need to get to a reserve study. We need to be able to say, okay, here's the infrastructure of our city, and here's the condition of it. this is the anticipation of the year that we're going to need to invest money, either in repair or replacement, and we've got to roll that thing out in the forward and discount it back with a cash flow so that we're putting monies away. So our dear treasurer, when he gets called and he needs to write a $3 million check to repair X, Y, and Z, he's got the adequate funds in order to do it. So those are the component parts of this. If you go to the last page, I'll just quickly talk you through. It's more of a balancing routine that we have to go through, and that's looking at our reserves in order to make sure we have adequate cash flow. Very quickly, we start with the general fund balance of where we expect it to be at June 30th of 26, and what the receipts are, which came off of the previous pages. The adjusted expenditures, it shows a structural surplus or deficit, and then we layer in transfers to the CIP fund, which is a cash transfer. It's not an operating expense transfer, key point. And that will give us an adjusted fund balance, which we do our test to make sure we've got adequate reserves. And those of you that remember, we have to maintain 50% of our expenditures as a reserve requirement in order to maintain cash flow. And yes, there will be some unencumbered general fund balances. They will go up and down, and we cannot manage that to zero. We have to use some judgment as well there.
Can you go back to page 6?
Pardon?
Can you go back to page 6? One page back.
That's the capital? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So where's the detail on, did you just take $4,250,000 in the first year and then escalate it, or did you have actual projects for every year? Does this tie back to actual projects?
I don't have it tied back to actual projects at this stage because that's the work that needs to be done. We know that number, based on the last information we've seen from the city, is north of $30 million, and we know that doesn't cover everything anywhere close.
Can you at least tie the $4,250,000 back to actual projects?
Not in 27 at this stage, no. I would have to sit down and understand what the emergency needs are, what the timing of the various projects are.
So how'd you come up with that number?
I looked at the fact, in one respect, that was it, Michael, but we've got $30 to $40 million we know that is in our future, and I used as an example at the golf club recently that they put $1.7 million away a year for their operation, which is significantly less than this one. And it did not seem unrealistic that the number needs to be north of $4 million.
The other thing that we want to do as we think about this is going to the remaining fund balance. So one of the lines is, I think it's on page 7 of 7, projected fund balance. So it does go up, but it goes up really quite slowly. And so whatever numbers we actually land on when it's the capital fund and the rest of everything we're talking about, we do need the final fund balance to track upward so that we don't breach our reserve policy. So basically, as expenses grow over time, the fund balance that is left available to us to cover that reserve policy also has to track upwards.
Yeah, that coupled with the fact, and George, I apologize for this, but there's some concern about how much we have in our capital CIP fund as we sit today and we go forward. We're getting close to the bottom.
So when you just mentioned there's $30 to $40 million of projects, where's that list?
Well, there was a list George presented at...
that was on the list, yeah, from May 27th, I
whatever
believe.
the date was just
CIP
recently.
Oh, okay.
List that was presented on that day, yeah.
And there's a lot of things that are not included on that. And we've also deferred other things that out of next year.
One way to look at it, if you take 30 million and you divide it by 4.3, right? I mean, you take a long time to actually complete all of those projects. And by time you complete, I mean, that's 7 years, right? If you take $30 million of need, you divide it by 4.3 roughly per year, you get to about 7 years. That doesn't account for inflation in the intervening years, which again can be quite significant over 7 years. And it doesn't account for any new projects that might come up in that time frame. So, presumably some things will drop off that list, some new things will come on that list. It'll also be impacted by inflation. But if you think about it, $4 million ends up being a relatively modest attack on a $30 million.
Yeah, but it sounds like you guys are assuming that the 30 to 40 million all comes out of the general fund, which I would be surprised.
Where is it going to come from?
Special.
Well, that was all unfunded. So the 30 million is unfunded capital projects. Now, it's possible that we may find funding sources for some of them. I mean, we did discuss that in the past, that some of the water intrusion stuff, some of the other items, some of the road work, there may be other funding sources that kick in. But we've also run into situations where grant funding is not what we hope and expect it to be.
I was talking about special funds. Did you have something, Councilmember Quinn?
Yeah, you talk about this, I have a separate question.
Go ahead.
Page 7?
Yeah.
The deficit in fiscal year June 30th, 2026, in the first or the second column here. My notes from the last meeting were that the deficit with the cuts that we talked about came down to $2,061,000 and change.
Yes, that probably needs to be updated.
Sorry, what page are we on?
7.
I'm not sure this reflects the most recent thing from the other night. I'd have to go back and,
Okay.
because it's been a moving target. I apologize.
No, just wanted to.
But it's not,
Yeah, no,
it may be within a few $100,000.
Yeah, within 600.
Oh, actually, the $2,061,061, did that include the $1 million transfer to capital? It did, didn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so actually, you're double counting here.
What? The $2,006,000 does not include the transfer to capital. That would mean that it would be a $3,006,000 type number, a reduction of the fund balance.
So we dropped that more than $1 million bucks.
Yeah, I think we did.
Anyway,
Okay,
whatever.
well, anyway, that just needs to
not
tie,
updated.
it needs to tie back to the budget that ends up getting it.
Well, we haven't finalized the budget either.
Correct. Correct.
This should have been done in advance of the budget, to be very candid with you.
Let's go back to capital for a minute.
Well, the whole long-range plan and capital, yes.
I just did some hunting because I'm curious, and I was trying to figure out in California with smaller cities at what percentage of their budget they allocate to capital, and I understand that we have a bunch built up because we've deferred it. The AI answers I'm getting are around 5%. So I scratched my head thinking, okay, if it's at 30 million, is that right? 30 when we're done here? Is it 30 top line?
25 to 30, yeah.
Oh, let's use 30. So 5% of that is 1.5 million. It's a long stretch to get to 4.5, and 4.5 divided by 30.
Yeah.
But you have to look at the age of the community and the infrastructure and the amount of deferred maintenance. All of this community was built at the same time. It's no different than the school district.
No, I get it, and I understand that there's no reserve study. I actually agree with you. We need that. If this is a 10-year tax, it's $45 million, and I
Out of the general fund.
yeah.
That can't be right.
I don't-
mean, that we can't.
I think it's more than that.
I don't see how you go out and,
Well, I don't know if we'll get the community to agree to it anyway.
No, I can appreciate that. I just think the needs are going to be more than that.
okay.
Well, and Michael, a comment that I'll make is there's some members of our community that don't think we should pay down the pension. There's other members of our community that are appalled at the condition of our facilities, right? So
Yep.
I think we have a problem. We've got a real pension problem. We've got a real capital problem. Things keep coming up, whether it's water intrusion or stormwater capture mandates from the state of California or other things like that. And, the real answer is you can't do it all.
Yep.
You have to address part of the pension problem and part of the capital problem, and you probably can't do the ideal scenario with either one.
Yep.
And you have to, on the other side of that equation, Derek, you have to recognize that our only source of primary revenue is the residents. We don't have the luxury of commercial sales tax, TOT, or any of the other attributes. So it all falls directly on our residents' shoulders.
Right. That's right. Yeah. Which is really, I mean, again, I've said this before, to some extent, this is going to end up being a referendum on whether the residents want this city to continue to be a purely residential city, right? And if that's what they want, it is going to cost real money. And if that's what they don't want, then there's other options. But I don't think many residents want to explore that.
Okay, so kind of moving forward, thank you for that, leading us through that, David.
Well,
And Derek, that was
I guess before I wrap it up is, what's our next step? Where do we go? What's the direction that you want to collectively give us?
That's where I was headed. So we have, we do have, at least on the calendar, and I feel like we should stick with it, but we have another town hall meeting scheduled for July 1st, which is 2 weeks from today? 2 weeks from today. And I guess that presentation was, seemed like that was the
I think
the
that should be-
baseline of what we want to use, right?
That's a nice job.
Yeah, it was a nice job. I mean, some minor tweaks, I think we can use it.
I think we spent a lot of time putting it together, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, nice
But
job.
I think we also have to have some answers to our questions that support the numbers.
Yeah.
To go
That's
with
where,
it.
yeah, I said, I think that's where we're kind of, when you say to someone, okay, 17 and a half or 17.25, whatever it is, I think you really, I think where it needs maybe a little work in the story is you have to really be able to say, okay, and that number is this, this operational deficiency, this pension, and this, these additive, and this capital, right? I mean, it's good. Dave, you're a guy who always likes things to foot nicely, so.
And cross-foot.
So I think we need that. Because otherwise it does feel like, oh, well, we're estimating this and we're thinking that and maybe this and maybe
It's
that.
gotta be
I think we have to tighten that up.
So we did a survey. We got the results from the survey. We're introducing topics in public meetings, and we're having town halls. Where is the back and forth with the community that says, we're in, or you're crazy, or something in
I
between?
mean, I think that's got to be at the town hall, does it not?
Right, so the challenge at the first one was it was very, with the exception of formal public comment, and I'm not looking for a free-for-all, it was very one-directional, right? This is our issue, this is what we need help with, these are the problems, we're here to educate you, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. I think there needs to be some back and forth, even if it's spicy. And we need to understand from people that are engaged that want to come to say, we've looked at what you're balancing and this is what we think.
So.
And I don't want to pay $25,000 or $30,000 3 times to get that answer in a surveys.
Right. So I'm going to ask.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah, 1 second. So for our city attorney, yeah, how that was, and we talked about how to notice a meeting or how to organize a town hall differently so that it can be a back and forth. How do we do that? Why are you laughing?
That's the way you said it. Because I was writing that exact note to myself. How do we do that?
So, we just need to probably work with you or with an ad hoc to talk about the different ways. We just need to set up a fair system for how it would work so everyone has a chance to speak, but we also have a fair way to, have back and forth with the community.
I don't think we loved, I'd say let's not do the cards again. I don't think that worked as we envisioned. So let's maybe.
How have you seen that work?
I've seen where you would, break it out, have tables where everyone sits together, and it's just a conversation back and forth between separate council members at different tables to work with people.
Oh, we've done that before, years ago, but yeah.
You can also have a lawn table set up and just sort of, have a conversation back. You can have people at microphones.
Sorry, I didn't understand. Does that mean there's no collective listening to an opinion?
Well, The way I saw it happen there was the separate tables, so you could have smaller groups, and then at the end, each side sort of summarizes and sort of speaks together about what came up, or you can bring it back up to the to a table.
Can I make a suggestion? We've got our consultant on communications sitting here in the audience, and I would like to ask him if Tom would be so kind to go to the mic and give us some perspective, because that's what we're paying you for. And you've got a lot of judgment and experience.
You're on the spot.
Well, I put Tom on the spot more than once, so I'll do it again.
Yeah, that's, you put me on the spot since last Wednesday, I think, every day. With that being said, there are issues with Brown Act when you have all 5 members or more than 3 or more members of City Council presence. And that's the problem we had with the last meeting, the last town hall meeting. Where you've been most effective, actually, in having the back and forth conversation is the separate meetings, starting with I think it was the breakfast club meeting that you had. Some of you have had individual meetings amongst some neighborhood groups and everything. You can have those open discussions and back and forth and not having the worries of violating the Brown Act. Much like your city attorney here is trying to explain today, there are options where you can break out the groups. You may have some collective listening at the very beginning. It would be one way, and then you'd break out and you can hear directly from them. If you were to separate amongst the tables, that works. But it all goes back to whether or not the people are able to express their opinions. The surveys are great, yes. Mayor Pro Tem, I couldn't agree with you more. Sometimes you got to get away from them and just hear from the public and exercise their right to speak, and then exercise your right as a member of City Council to express to them what the challenges you have going forward. That is the most important thing. So moving forward, I encourage the group to do more of the smaller groups because, you know, when you go to these groups, they're tribal in nature because they may have their own particular issues depending on what club or what neighborhood they belong to, what their immediate issues are, and they may not care about some of the other issues that you're bringing up and speaking with. They may be mono-focused on a particular concern they have, maybe affecting their neighborhood. Maybe it's in association with public safety in the schools. Maybe it's because they have a heavier traveled traffic lane, or maybe that particular road that you're trying to reinforce that I understand that needs some work on. Those may be their concerns. Otherwise, some of those meetings go a little bit long.
I was going to say, are you advising, it seems like we need to have one more of the follow-up town hall, 5 council members. It seemed, because we kind of, when we had the last one, when was that, April? Oh my gosh, was it April, you guys?
Tax day.
That's right, it was tax day. You know, we said, oh, there'll be more of these and you'll have more information, you know, so Are you advising against one?
No, I'm not advising against it because there is one other option if you want to do a town hall meeting. Sometimes you can hire or have that would be me, you would have an individual that could help answer the question. So it's not the city council responding to the individual, it's the person that's running the meeting. The problem with that, and I see you shaking your head, and it's one of those things I tell city councils all the time, they don't want to hear from a paid consultant. They want to hear from their city council. But that is another option if you want to keep the group together and not do breakouts. They also probably want to hear from their city manager. I think I've heard people say in other cities that the city manager... That is very true.
I shouldn't be doodling while I'm...
Just here minding my own business.
That was awesome.
Tom, did you at one point mention that there was going to be a second survey going out once the...
There's an option. It's not something that's paid for. It's our subcontractor that we have, FM3, and what we do is go out and do a second survey if the council seems... if they feel it's necessary, if they want to see if the mood of the people has changed in any way on any of the subject matter points. I can point out to you that some of the things that you talked about today are very much on a high priority. when we did that community survey, the idea was to determine what people think you as a city council should prioritize as part of your budget. A lot of those things were talked about. And I will agree that one of the things that is lightly touched on is pension obligations. Those usually tend to poll very low. But it does become very much important part of number 5 that came out on that list. And in the 90 percentile, if I remember, 9 out of 10 likely voters that said they want to see financial stability in the city of Palos Verdes Estates. So it's absolutely true. It's just how we message it so people understand, no, wait a minute. Are we going to take care of our neighborhoods and not burn down? Are we going to be able to keep our police department, which is extraordinarily popular? I can tell you right now, in LA County, don't even think about getting a sheriff's deputy to show up at your home if you call them in a reasonable amount of time, because they are challenged. Sure. But you have...
Tom, can I ask you, I thought that we were at least tentatively planning on doing a second survey, and I thought, part of it was as we started to narrow in on some of the additional topics like, pension funding, like tree trimming, et cetera, we're scoping a little bit, more nuanced than we were 2 months ago. So I was planning on or expecting there to be a second survey. Would you recommend that we proceed with that?
Well, we said we were going to do the second survey after we did a bunch of community outreach and
July,
communication, and we were going to do 5 town halls, and we've done 1. So that's, I don't know what I don't know what you'd be resurveying, because you haven't put we haven't, other than the newsletters, probably we haven't put anything out there.
Right. The idea is to see if that the people have received the information that we're trying to push out on the various levels and the various platforms that we use, and then to identify whether or not they still believe the city of Palos Verdes needs money, specifically and most importantly, not specifically, but most importantly for some of the more the items related to public safety. And when I say public safety, remember, it's more about public health and safety. It has to do with the brush clearance. It has to do with traffic safety. It has to do with engineering. I understand you have a new public works director now. The public works director is going to look at a variety of things that have to do with public safety in regards to the infrastructure, to traffic engineering, to building codes, et cetera, and so on. There's all kinds of nuances which people want to prioritize their budgeting on. And I have to say the survey came in right after the Eaton fires and the Palisades fires. And so people were mono-focused on that. Where I believe the last survey, it was because of the flooding and the rains you had. Sure. We have to stay mobile and somewhat pivot to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the community. You are in a serious situation with your budget.
Craig?
In the weeds question, if I may, and back to Michael's question. We did put out the town hall video out on our website, and my question is, do we have any sense of how many views that our residents have looked at that particular video, just to get a sense if we have any engagement in that? But I do think a survey eventually would be needed. And my other question is for the council. At some point, we have to come up with a number. We have to relatively agree to the number. When do we have to do that? By when? There's a question for...
How do we do that?
Get
up there, Tom.
There's one thing I can say is that we all recognize that you represent your constituents, your community, and you all have a considerable number of people that supported you and putting you here to make the decisions moving forward. We also recognize as consultants that sometimes what we hear or sometimes what we say is not what they hear, and it goes both ways. And the survey, and why we recommend surveys, is the best way to hear from individuals when they're at home, whether they be on their computer or they speak to someone, they provide that information to us that helps us move forward in the right direction so you can make the right decision moving forward.
To answer your question, Councilmember Quinn, there's 507 views on YouTube for the town hall.
Oh, that's good.
Oh, good.
Just a couple other clarifications.
I'd like to make one clarifying point on the upcoming town hall. It's sort of a legal point as to what we're allowed and not allowed to do. So the city attorney can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding of the Brown Act that we are permitted to engage in essentially brief, clarifying conversations with individual speakers. And there is, so long as it is part of the agenda, right, and presumably anything related to the budget and the long-term fiscal needs would be part of the agenda. We can write the agenda in a broad way to incorporate all of those topics. We are allowed to do that. The only real legal concern with an approach like that is if you give one person 20 minutes, hypothetically, then it chills the speech of everyone else, or it gives unfair time to everyone else, which is really not within the spirit or intent of the Brown Act. But there isn't, if there was one speaker and they had a brilliant idea, or they had a concern that none of us had realized up to that point, and we all wanted to ask one or two questions about that, there's really not a prohibition on that kind of a clarifying back and forth conversation. The other way to do it, if we want to be really safe, is to let all the speakers speak at once. We take notes on their questions and concerns. Then we close the public hearing. We move to our deliberative session, and then we talk about the questions and concerns that they had raised. So I personally,
that might work.
The first one,
Or I was going to say, I like the first approach, which was noticing a Q&A section of the agenda with, this is the opportunity for people to make public comments and the council to respond. And you have, to Derek's point, you'd have to manage we'd have to manage the time and make sure it doesn't go off on crazy tangents. But City Manager, you were going to say something?
Well, yeah. Councilmember Lazaro actually kind of got there, but this is helpful. The city attorney had to leave for another meeting, but before he left, I asked if him and Tom and I could get on a call this week and brainstorm how we can manage
How
this.
to notice it, so that we can have a back and forth.
But what's really helpful is if we can get the council, the five of you, to kind of give clear direction on how you want this to end up, and we'll try to make it happen, right? So we'll always, with stuff I always hate to do is guess. So if I'm hearing the last comment, you'd like to be able to have a little dialogue with a speaker, notice it in such a way and put some parameters on it so that one person doesn't get 20
Monopolize,
minutes while someone else.
Sure. Yeah.
So is that something that you would like? Because time is of the essence for us to turn this around by July 1st. So is that something you'd like us to investigate and come up with a way to do it?
So, yeah. Yeah, I think
When you
so.
talk about time, like 1 minute to say something, or are you saying 5 minutes for people to talk?
Well, see that. So that's what we did last time.
Well, we just did one-sided public comment.
Yeah, then it's.
Well, correct. And so we had to estimate, and I think we said we put it at 1 minute, not knowing how many people were going to be there. And so we were having trouble trying to back into a 2 or 3 hour window. And I think we ended up going with a 3 hour window. And if you remember that last hour, people were just peeling out. It was just too long.
Well, people commented that the presentation was too long. So this one's more
We've
concise.
tightened that up.
Yeah. This one's far more concise.
It should be 20 minutes.
We don't have to, go back and forth and explain the whole thing. And the majority of it can be, okay, what do you think?
And then parameters back is on how long the question is versus how much, or maybe we put let me just throw it out there since we're workshopping this, we just put a block of time per speaker. So if they use their X minutes to ask their question or make their point, great, but maybe we're all held to the same 3 minute time thing. So if you can't get your response back in 3 minutes, you can't. We have to have some sort of parameters that's fair for everybody and also not at 11 at night say, oh, sorry, you 30 speakers, we're not going to.
Personally, I'd leave it up to the mayor to make a call at the start of the meeting. And if you see 5 people in there versus 500,
Yeah.
you can say you get 7 minutes versus you get 2 minutes, right? But I like the idea of some sort of parameter that any one person doesn't get more than 5 minutes or 7 minutes or something to that effect.
I've got another comment about what Michael asked earlier. Is there another way to collect feedback from the residents? Can we have them send questions into, to an email or whatever, Tom? Not, I mean, in addition to what we're talking about.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom. I know what you're going to.
Actually, we have worked post surveys. We would do a website and provide for another survey. It's not scientific by any means, but it would allow for people to ask questions and get answers to those questions. So it is possible. We would just have to be able to work with the city's team in setting up that page. What we would hope is that we would have a landing page that would have all the answers to all the questions. We're getting there, but we're not there yet until you adopt a budget. Because people will always point back to, show me the numbers.
I think the best answer we can do short term, in addition to what we're talking here, is try to get as many residents to host neighborhood gatherings, and we have one canned presentation. The 5 of us can all deliver the same presentation in different homes and interact with residents. Maybe 2 of us go to a particular venue, or just one of us, depending upon the situation. But I think we all have to get out in the field right now and tell the same story and be singing out of the same hymnal, and we've got to have we've got to agree on a number. Our needs are, it's 17.5 or 14.3 or 24.5. I don't care, but we've got to have a consistent story.
So for the presentation, so to that point, then do we need to give some specific feedback on the presentation so that you guys can go back and fine tune that for July 1? So obviously we want more information on a pension. The pension scenario.
I wrote the email.
You've got that.
For me, I want a more detailed list of what foots to the 17.5 million or 17,250, whatever the number was. That was for me.
What do you mean by what foots to it? I don't understand that.
So I had said it before. There's an operational shortfall of X, and we want to have a pension number or the additives. And then capital spending and, I guess pension was in the additives to say, okay, here's how you got to 17.5.
Well, let us work on that. That's not a simple answer because there's a number of moving parts that go into the model.
Well, the 17.5 had to come from somewhere other than thin air. You must have.
No. I think it's an easy enough ask, personally. Your point, Madam Mayor, was break it into sort of existing operational, sort of new items, and then CIP, effectively, I believe.
Correct.
Or transfers to CIP. I think those were the 3.
Roughly. I think that works roughly. Yeah. Craig, did you want to add something?
We need to decide if $1 million is enough for the pension pay down or if it's a bigger number than that, right? And so.
That's one of the things that Michael's going to.
I sent the email to Carrie.
Yeah, they're going to calculate.
Yeah.
And
the only other thing, and it's hard to do, we talked about it, but the offsets, when we go to hire new folks, what offsets are there? Offsets, in terms of overtime, and ending contracts. And maybe it's not specific enough, but just when there is an ask, there's also, here's the ROI, here's where the offsets are going to be, and here's a target. So the investment might be half of what you're asking for because we're going to have offsets in the.
Right. Are there any really strong feelings at this point on things like a sunset or things like a cutoff for seniors, low income, or a COLA? Because ultimately those are things we need to survey again. I'm a strong proponent of doing another survey relatively soon to see the feedback from residents on some of those items. But anything just right off the bat that we want to come to the next meeting with?
I'll
Something-
start out. I agree that we should have a COLA. I'd like to see no sunset, if at all possible, because this is going to be an issue for us forever. This may not be realistic, but that's...
How does a 42% vote percentage sound to you?
Was it Richard maybe when he did the survey presentation? He kind
I
of said
think-
if you want a COLA, you got to have a sunset.
Uh-huh.
And if you don't.
It's one or the other, that's
I
what he
think
said.
Or was it opposite?
No,
what
it
I
was,
said?
it was, go with one. If you're going to, you don't do multiples, try to figure out which one you want to go with, because it certainly would help. And when, to Derek's question about the survey, if you decide to go with another one, I wouldn't do one until you finally have the numbers, meaning that you have adopted a budget. Again, people are going to ask, show me the numbers. We have to be very transparent with the public. There's no, shell game here or anything like that. In regards to the pension, obviously I've worked with a number of cities. It's always been a priority. But what we try to do and focus on when we're trying to meet with the public is what their priorities are. And for the most of the time, for the most of the people, the priorities are usually on public safety and health and safety and certain programs. So, and streets and potholes.
Well, to that point, I wanted to say one other thing. When we, depending on how this all plays out, if we actually move forward with a ballot measure, I believe the right way to frame it, simply from a formal standpoint, is that it would be a public safety ballot measure. And to the mayor's point, it would obviously free up money that would then apply to other categories. But there's also ultimately going to need to be a specific allocation on any parcel tax. And it's probably not a good idea to throw the kitchen sink into it, but narrow it down to a scope that is more easily explained. And you could say it covers police, fire, and weed abatement, or police and fire. We have to ultimately work out exactly what those numbers are, but it is almost certainly a better framing to pass something than to say it's, also pays for, road maintenance and waterworks, or, other things that ultimately, frankly, just kind of confuse people.
Yeah, I want to go back a minute to the surveys. I agree that we need to do another survey, but I really don't think we want to do those until we can get 10 or 15 neighborhood coffees and so forth, and get the 5 of us out there in front of the residents talking about what is needed in this presentation that we've got, or some version of it.
Sure, how you're going to organize that.
Yeah. So
we have to figure out a way to do that ASAP and get homes opened up so that these types of interactions can take place right after the 4th of July.
Sorry, I got to manage the time because there is a meeting in this room in a little bit. So back to Councilmember Quinn's original question a few minutes ago before we segued. I mean, are we not thinking I know a sunset's is hard, but
If you don't sunset
do people
if you don't sunset it, you're
approve?
dead.
That's what I think.
You're dead.
I think it has
I
to
think
have
we
a
have to have a
sunset.
sunset or we don't pass.
You have to
it. I hate to
give
say
people
it,
an
'cause I
opportunity to
kind of don't
revisit
want
at
one,
some
but-
period. It seems like.
And, one of the reasons for that argument is not just because they're uncomfortable with leaving something in place forever, but some argue that, with, how do I say this in a respectful way? There will potentially be more homes turning over as the current population moves on.
Moves. They just move. They
and
don't have to move on.
That will. God love you, Victoria.
Alter the property track.
Go ahead. Finish your sentence. I'm sorry.
You got my point. I mean,
Yeah.
values on homes will gradually be resetting.
Yeah.
Some of those homes will be in trusts, and they'll be passed, and they won't, and so
I mean,
we
that's
don't
my
know the
gut.
impact
I don't
of that.
Tom, do you have an advice? To me, I think you have to have a sunset because people have to
I'm
have
fine.
an opportunity
I'm
to
fine.
revisit.
It's very presumptuous not to do
Process.
that.
I'd rather not do it again, but
I know.
sunset in 20 years, how's that? 10 years. But sunset's okay.
Yeah. Can you do 15? Like, will people,
If we can go that
would
far,
people
that'd
be
be great.
comfortable with 50? 20 seems like a lot, but 10 doesn't seem like enough, right?
I agree.
I don't know. And then, but then do we do so back to your question, part two, we still do a COLA on that?
I think we should do a COLA with a collar, a ceiling.
Agreed.
I mean, just on the experience we've had with what we've watched over time while we've been here, the percentage that Measure E makes up keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The rest of it keeps getting squeezed, and here we are. If there was a COLA in place, and if Measure D had passed, we'd be in a little better shoes today.
A lot better.
I guess I feel like if we had the ideal scenario number, do you still need the COLA? Because you put a lot in there.
Maybe you just need a smaller number, but I think
Smaller number, bigger COLA, or not bigger COLA,
No,
but smaller number and a COLA, maybe?
I think what we need is, the COLA, my recommendation would be do a COLA at 3% as a ceiling. If it falls below that in a given year, we follow CPI. If it goes above it, that it's capped at
You have to
3%.
cut, yeah, and then you just, if it goes above, you got to cut somewhere.
Well, yeah, it just have to be managed by the city. I also think we need to have a discussion about a senior's exemption or a concession or whatever. I don't know what that would look like and who needs to take the leadership to talk that through.
that problem.
Oh, really? I don't see two.
I had a conversation at one point with the city attorney about this, and they told me that while it is by far the most common approach to use the County of LA low income number, which is approximately $80,000, that technically we are allowed to define low income however we want, although it is unorthodox. So in theory, we could say if you're over 65 and you make less than 100,000, to pick a number out of the air, we could define some sort of an exemption or reduction based on that level. But the only concern that I have with it, I mean, it sounds good. The only concern I have with it is you could have a senior whose income is 100,000, but they've
Sitting
got
on a
$3
$10
million
million
of
house.
cash in the bank.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just, sorry, I mean,
The
no, you guys know I always start at no before I have to get to yes.
The
but
administration
don't
of such a
support
program
Bad idea.
is also going to have to be built into the cost, because that is not going to be cheap.
Yeah.
We'd have to have a protocol.
I just, I don't know if someone's trying to pick up on the exemption at the school district. I mean, the school district exemption is about, not having any kids in the school district. Even though I would say, hey,
Wait a minute,
the value.
you already put the kids through, now you got to pay your part.
Yeah, well, plus, if anybody thinks the value of your house isn't tied to the quality of the school district in your city, I mean, you're kind of nuts. I mean, they're tied, so you do get a benefit. But anyway, in our city, I think, because I will say that we went, when we did the Malaga Cove Homeowners Association, there was a pretty robust discussion about the unfairness of people who have lived in their homes for many, 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 many years, and they pay $5,000 a year, if that, on property taxes, and then what we get our 11 cents on the dollar on that. So it just, I think, I think when you're talking about this kind of an exemption, you're like, I would not be in favor. I mean, I think you gotta pay to live here.
I agree. So we've agreed on a 3% COLA, that's what I heard?
I think that's what we're gonna model anyway.
As a ceiling?
Yeah. And then 15 years?
With the cap, right?
That was a cap.
With a cap.
It was a cap, correct.
And 15-year sunset? Does that sound fair? Doable? Realistic? 15 years?
Well, he can't tell you.
Would we survey
He can't
that?
tell you if it's realistic.
I think we would survey that. Maybe we would survey 15 and 12?
Well, there's also a strategy too. You have to look at the election years going out so that when it's getting ready to sunset, you don't want it to sunset when you can't go to the polls for 2 years, because then you're actually going to the polls
2 years
maybe in the
early.
11th year.
Right.
Forward thinking.
You see what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So
Right,
you have
for
to,
sure.
we have to
Yeah.
model that too.
Okay, something
Okay.
like that.
Thank you.
Somewhere
Good advice.
between 10 and 15, and we're going to
All
let
right,
the experts.
we'll take that back, and Derek and I will work with Tom, and we'll add these additives. We'll put in some
So you
language.
got a hard no on the
Senior.
no sunset, and you got a pretty strong no on the senior fairness issue.
Weren't there 4 on that page? It was the sunset, the COLA, the senior, and what was the 4th one? I can't remember.
Size.
Pardon?
The size of it.
Yeah.
Maybe?
I mean, there is also an argument not to do a COLA
the
and
tail
just
end.
make it sunset sooner,
Sure.
but
Allocation
that
formula.
is
We gotta deal
painful,
with that.
obviously, but it's more likely to pass, and I think we should at least consider
Oh,
that.
square footage versus
Say again,
base?
sorry, say again, Derek, we lost you for a second there. Say
Yeah,
again.
so another possibility is no COLA, have it sunset in 7 or 8 years.
Oh, God, no.
I think that models out to be the most likely to pass, but it's also the most painful because it comes back in 7 or
Very
8
painful.
years.
That means in 3 years, you got to pick it up again and try and start to deal with it.
May I make
Yes.
a suggestion?
Yes, city manager,
We
please.
seem to be having a lot of debates without a lot of data. So what I'm hearing is we've got some things to test in a survey. And to go all the way back to a question from a while ago, that survey is included in the budget, and we're always planning to get that out in July. And I'd also like to add that this was a really, really effective workshop. I'll tell you from staff's perspective, and I believe the ad hoc committee, I gave Councilmember McGowan a lot of credit because he put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. He had to deal with me and George and Derek asking a lot of questions up until an hour before we started. But it's really challenging for even the ad hoc and staff to kind of figure out what exactly the council wants things to look like. So I think we got a lot accomplished tonight. And as a relative newcomer to this city, I hear a lot of, this should have been done 2 years ago. Well, it wasn't. And we need this ASAP. Look, you guys have made incredible progress in the last few months. I know it's not enough, but a lot has been done. This PowerPoint has been refined over and over, and it's getting closer and closer to being perfect. So I have to give you those reflections because that's what I've been sitting here listening to. And as the people that sit back in the office all day trying to make these numbers work and put all this salad together, this is really, really, really helpful for us. So thank you.
Before we conclude, I want to go back to the allocation question. What is the consensus of the four of you with the allocation formula? I think we need to revisit the 342. I don't know where that came from, which was the base cost. And maybe we have to increase the base cost, and then we stick with a 20 cent per square foot, or
You're probably going to increase both, I would think.
Let's go back to the way I think Carrie said it. We're asking each other questions without data, right?
Yep.
My answer to the 4 questions, and we sort of bantered some of it based on what we think our constituents think, right? My answer is whatever combination of those things makes it most satisfactory, appealing, and likely to pass.
Okay. What I'm trying to,
and I can't make it up.
So actually,
what I'm trying to build into the equation
maybe
here,
consider
Michael,
doing the
is the
survey
fact that
sooner
we
rather
need to
than
put
later?
this into the presentation. And we have to have a hypothesis. And I think what I'm hearing is a hypothesis. We're thinking maybe 15 years sunset. We're thinking a 3% collar on a COLA. We're thinking we don't know have an answer to the senior discount, whatever. And the allocation formula, we think it needs to be adjusted. And Derek and I can work up a couple, 3 different scenarios and see what makes sense.
I just would make a recommendation. I don't think we have agreement that we're going to do the senior discount, so I would take that off the table.
Yeah, I would too. To take that out. We have three people saying
If that's a
no.
consensus.
Yeah. I'd like to just throw out there, though, I actually think, and I don't necessarily disagree with that last comment, although I feel for some of the seniors who will be impacted, but I would like to propose that we do a survey sooner rather than later, and there's a few reasons. One, I think that was already our tentative plan. 2, I think that over the past 2 or 3 months, as we've been talking about this, we have uncovered a number of areas where frankly, it is a matter of opinion, as to what the best approach is. Even to the point about the allocation formula, do you go with a bigger base number or do you go with a bigger variable number, the per square footage approach? There's going to be push and pull between people with bigger homes and smaller homes. There's going to be push and pull on some of these other items, like does the community truly support more money for weed abatement? Before I go into homes and community centers and the library and so forth and do a bunch more of these face-to-face meetings with folks, I'd actually like to have more data on how people really feel about those issues in the community across a broad swath, and then hone in on that, and then fire off a series of town halls, either all 5 of us or smaller groups, where we push out the message. So to me, it would be tremendously helpful to have that survey potentially kick off even by maybe early July, and then have that data toward the end of July as we sort of push through into the summer and continue that outreach.
But Derek, what information do you think the community has? What's been communicated to the community such that they would have a different opinion?
Yeah.
That's right.
I mean,
Yeah, so I think I think there's been a lot of conversation, and I think there's 2 pieces to it. I think there has been a lot of community conversation. We also know people have been sending out email blasts and all sorts of other things that frankly has sparked quite a bit of conversation, not all of it positive, frankly. But I also think that, more to the point I was just making, there's a number of items where, very bluntly, we will be guessing or we will be reflecting our own personal biases in saying, yes, we should have a COLA, it should be 3%, or, we should spend $700 on trees or whatever. I'd like to ask those questions of the community. So before we go out and spend a lot of time, energy, and money on education and town halls and so forth and so on, we have a sense that we are reflecting the latest version of our community's wishes. And not to say that we're going to do exactly what they say in the survey, but I think we need to at least orient around the results of that survey and hone in on a couple of these other points. And I think having that in the July timeframe would be very helpful.
Derek, I just want to add one other comment, and that is, we'll get the feedback. It'll be important to get it to see if we can get this to pass, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we have to put the ideal out there. Whatever that number is important, because if the community is at a lower point, we have to tell them what services will not be available in a very clear and concise manner. So, it's quite likely that they're not going to agree with anything we put on here. But wow. I think this is realistic.
Easy, Tiger. Martin, sorry, and I don't mean to put you on the spot. Could you respond to what Derek said and what your thoughts were? Because you asked, what's been shared that makes you want to go out for a survey? I got the body language.
This does not resonate with me.
Communicate.
So what I believe is that this is what I've heard. What I've heard is that the community wants more detail.
Yep.
Wants more information, and this is, in my mind, the first information that's real and tangible. This information that we shared today, and it's good information, it's good data. And I think this is the first time that we've talked about it, and I don't think we've told it to any part of the community except who is here in this, right with us right now. Mm-hmm. So that's all I'm saying.
I agree 100%. I think we need I agree with Derek that we need to do another survey, but I think we need to get into the homes. We start to have to educate and have interactions, and we do the survey later this summer. We got to see if we can move the needle.
Well,
we're not going to demonstrate moving the needle right now.
I think we at least have to get past this town hall.
Can we actually pass a 66% vote? Can we actually pass a 66% vote? We kind of need to know that by the end of July, my friends.
All right, Martin, what were you saying?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't think the survey would look any different than what it. I'm exaggerating, it will look a little bit different.
Yeah.
But there's no massive, spill of data or clarification, or what even the plan is.
Yeah.
Yep.
What they've asked for.
I think we're probably a little bit later in July.
I think
probably.
what the community's asked for is data. They want to have more data.
Do you think that there was is your perception,
Yes.
speaking to a member of the community that
Yes.
speaks with a lot of people, is your perception that what was provided here today, in conjunction with what's in the attachment, along with the conversation,
Yes.
does that lead us a long way in the direction? And what do you feel is still missing? And do you think anything is missing from the presentation itself?
I think two things were missing that I believe you will address. One thing is our house. If not now, when? Same thing with the pensions. If not now, when? Just that conversation is, so our house, I think our house, the way we've talked about that is that's off, we just can't be encompassed with this measure. And the pension, I think you're working through that. I think that you also think that it has to be, something needs to be said.
So we have to wrap up. Thank you very much. I think those were good comments. Did you have a follow-up question on that?
No.
I'm sorry. Okay. So, sorry, we got to wrap up here. So in terms of the presentation, because now we're just 2 weeks away from the town hall, because what I think we don't want to have a repeat of the kind of getting the final presentation for the last town hall was extremely painful. So I think we will take, I don't know if I'm looking to, I guess I'm looking at Tom, but the fine-tune this presentation that we saw, which is, 98% pretty darn good. And then we're just going to divide up the pages and everyone's going to take, I don't think you'll be given the whole thing.
Well, again, in the interest of time, I think one person needs to give the whole thing. It should only be a 20, 25-minute presentation, and we should just be able to go through it. The rest of us should be able to be very supportive of it.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so that's probably a question mark out there that we need to work through in the next 2 weeks. Okay.
Can I throw a suggestion out on
Yes,
one of
please.
Martin's comments? So Martin, you talked about addressing this house. I'm just throwing this out. What if we said in 2039, when our centennial is up, that we have a big celebration and we take care of this house?
Perfect. I don't know.
I mean, it was just a separate, but it's a separate project. But we can definitively say.
But Craig, are you going to use the lot next door? Are you going to rebuild it? Are you going to move down to Malaga Cove? Are you gonna?
We're just going to say, hey, we're going to park this
I mean,
for the centennial.
the problem
You
is,
have to figure
and
that
not to
out, that
reopen it,
narrative,
but the
Albert.
problem is that there's structural issues that need to be addressed in the short term, and there might be a Band-Aid, there might not be, but I don't think we can say for sure that we're not going to look at it until 2039.
No.
Well, I think you have to do it well in advance of that in order to have it open by then. But
Well, and I'll make one comment, and I'm going to shut up on this whole topic. My comment is, I think you need to get a better understanding of the bread box before you make any assumptions.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Okay. Well, good. Pretty much right on schedule. Anybody have anything else?
nope.
City manager, anything else to add?
Thank you for all the work on the presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for all of your
to
help.
the ad hoc, David and Michael. We really appreciate your work.
Michael, you mean? Derek
David and David. I'm so sorry. Derek and David, you're sitting right there. I'm so sorry, David. David and Derek, thank you for your work. And we are adjourned. Thank you.